So, nice to meet you. Basically, this is the second class. We had a class yesterday, and it was the introduction to the introduction. It was a brief overview of what Kabbalah is and the four main stages of the historical development of Kabbalah. And then we opened some of the most fundamental topics or concepts in Kabbalah. The first one being the Or Ein Sof, the infinite light, which is the description of God before creation. Genesis, the book of Bereshit in Hebrew, starts with the letter Bet, which is B, the second letter of the alphabet. And we said that one of the interpretations of this is that it hints at the fact that Bereshit onward talks about the nature of duality, the duality primarily of creator and creation. But the fact that it's the main purpose of the Torah is to bring to the world the idea of monotheism, it seems strange that it starts with the letter B and not with the letter A and Aleph, which it could easily have been if it had started with the phrase Elokim bara bereshit, God created in the beginning. And yet it starts with B. So one of the interpretations given in Kabbalah is that this B, this Bet in the beginning, is an invitation to look behind it, to look at what happened before the beginning, before Genesis, and to find the hidden Aleph, the hidden unity, hiding behind the initial Bet. And in fact, the word Aleph in Hebrew, the name of the first letter, when you transmute the order of the letters, it becomes the word Pele, which means hidden. So Aleph, when you read it backwards, becomes Pele. There is a hidden unity, an Aleph, a unity that is in the state of Pele. It's hidden behind the duality of creator, creation, heaven and earth, lower waters, higher waters, and everything that, and of course later on, body and soul. So the first or most fundamental concept in the Kabbalah that we're learning here, which is called Kabbalat Ha'ari, the Kabbalah that comes from Rabbi Isaac Luria, who lived in the 16th century. He summed up all of the Kabbalistic knowledge came before him, he systemized it, he turned it into a very, very solid and structured and detailed system. He didn't write any of this, he taught it to his students, they wrote it. In the last 2 years of his life, he came to the city of Tzfat in the Galilee when he was 36. He lived there for 2 years, 2.5 actually, and he died when he was 38. And in those 2 years, he transmitted all of his knowledge to his students and they wrote it. And it is agreed that this is the strongest and most important step in the evolution of Kabbalah, and it is studied by all the different branches of Judaism that study Kabbalah. So, in fact, these ideas are already to be found in the previous important treatise, which is the Zohar, the idea of this infinite light, but the Ari starts with it very, very clearly. So, Or Ein Sof means infinite light. And then the first question that this raises, and this is what we talked about yesterday, is why would a perfect, infinite being create a finite, imperfect world? Why does a perfect, infinite being need to do anything if he or it is infinite and perfect? Infinite light. Light means knowledge and goodness, and infinite means there's no boundaries and no bounds. And the answer, there are several answers given, we discussed this. So the first answer and deepest answer is we don't know. But then there are 4 answers that attempt to do know. And I'll just repeat them very briefly. The first one is that this infinite being had a desire to dwell in the lower realms. There's an inexplicable desire to dwell in a place that is as far away from it as possible. And for this you need to create a world. realms and then have lower realms. And so he can then appear in those realms and dwell in them. Second answer given is that he wants to be heard or acknowledged or perceived from the outside by something other than him. So this is another reason to create the world. And then the third reason is that being good, he wanted to benefit others, therefore you need an other to benefit. In Hebrew it's called teva hatov leheitiv. It is the nature of the good to bestow goodness upon others. So you need some others. Basically, the creation of the world is God creating an other, something other than him, so we can have a relationship with this other, and this is creation. The fourth and final reason is that there was a kingly aspect or a kingly character to this infinity, but there is no king without a people. Similarly, we can say there is no shepherd without a flock, and there is no teacher without students, and there is no parent without children, and so on. And the common thread being that the king or the shepherd, they not only bestow goodness upon others, but they also raise them. Maybe they even raise them to be like themselves at some point. So these are four answers, and they seem oddly anthropomorphic and at odds with this abstract entity of infinite light. But what they have in common is something very, very simple and very deep. And this is a concept that says that an infinite perfect being is, by definition, also imperfect. It lacks something very, very fundamental about being. It lacks the experience of imperfection. It lacks the experience of not having something. It lacks the experience of not knowing something. So perfection is in and of itself imperfect. It's like saying, he's too perfect. It's too perfect. Something is too perfect means I can't relate to it. He can't relate to me. And he seems to be lacking something that we deeply appreciate, and not for no reason, which is there is something very great about growing, about learning, about perfecting, not just being in a state of perfection. We advanced from a state of ignorance to a state of knowledge, from a state of darkness to a state of light, from a state of being small to a state of being greater. And there is a value to this process of learning and growing and first needing something and longing for something and then suddenly acquiring it, that is more than just the pleasure of filling an emptiness. There appears to be something inherent. If we know something to begin, if we're told an answer, as opposed to if we're given the question, then given time to ponder the question, and then solving it on our own, we learn it in a much deeper and better way. So the idea is, we're going around it in all kinds of different formulations, but the idea is very simple. It says that an infinite being of light and perfection and knowledge lacks the experience of not knowing and growing from imperfection to perfection, or the process of perfecting, and therefore he needs, or it needs, to create a void, an absence of itself, in order to remember itself or recognize itself, and then it becomes even more perfect than before. So we can talk about degrees of perfection, and we can say that perfection is only a very initial level or order of perfection, and a greater perfection would be to have both perfection and the process of perfecting, which requires imperfection. And all these four reasons have this in common. So he wants to dwell in the lower realms. He wants to bring his light into a place that does not acknowledge its light. And he wants to benefit others. Then again, you need someone who needs you, who doesn't have you, who is in a state, there's something he experiences evil or something that's bad, or a lack of light, a lack of divine knowledge, and then he discovers, and this creation becomes a way for this divinity to acknowledge or learn itself and evolve. So this is the purpose of reality, of creation. It's not a mistake, it's not a fluke, it's not an illusion. It's something that its purpose is for God to acquire this higher state of perfection. So in a way, He creates a creation that needs Him. Initially, we may live in this world and be in a state of forgetfulness or darkness. In Hebrew, these words have the same letters. Chashecha is darkness and shichecha is forgetfulness, and the opposite of light and knowledge. So we're in a state of darkness, but if we remember where we came from, then we start this journey of back to God. And through this need that we experience, He also experiences need. He needs us to need Him. And so this sort of dialogue or a process, it's not an equal dialogue, it's a dialogue of teacher and learner or king and people, but it starts. So we said that the first concept is Or Ein Sof, and the first question is why would it create a world, and these are the answers given. And again, I remind you that the first answer is we don't know, so it puts brackets around the four answers and around everything I just said. But still, there's room for what's in the brackets. And then the second concept was that this infinite divinity, paradoxically, has a central point. And it's paradoxical because an infinite space or an infinite area does not have a center. But it is said that He had a center, a central point, something that He cares about more than other things. Something which feels more like Him, although it's all infinite light. And from that point, He did the first step of creating the world, which is still before creation. It's still the prequel to Genesis. He did something called diminishment, tzimtzum in Hebrew. The tzimtzum here, the diminishment, is not to take something big and make it smaller, is to take something infinite and open up a space. So He diminished Himself sideways in all directions and created, so to speak, an empty void, halal panui. And this is symbolized or illustrated as a circle, as a sort of dark sphere or circle within this infinite light. It's surrounded on all sides by this infinite light, and in some strange way, it's at the center of this infinite light. Meaning, this infinity, this divinity, cares about reality more than about itself in some way. He puts Himself in the side, and He opens up this space, and this is what He cares about the most. Is what He's interested in. Let's see how this game of a little bit of hide and seek develops. It's still not the world, or the worlds, as the Kabbalists refer to them, because there are many, many worlds, many higher, in fact an infinite amount of worlds, but they're in this finite metaphorical space within divinity. And two important things need to be said about this empty space. One is that it's not completely empty. There is a residue or an impression left behind of the divinity that filled it up. The Aramaic word, which is similar, has a Hebrew root also, is reshimu. Reshimu, in Hebrew, roshem, is impression or residue left behind. So this is an empty space, but if you develop your sense of smell, or if you look deeply enough, you can feel wherever you are in this space. There's high and low, and there's closer to God and far away, and there's all kinds of places to be in this space, but everywhere they're all equally, just like a bottle full of perfume or filled with wine, that is, the wine or perfume is poured out, but then the smell remains. So this is the image used to describe this reshimu, this residue or impression of divinity. So it's a state of darkness and forgetfulness, but there is some residue of remembrance, just like a smell evokes memories, and this bears the world. Without this, the world would collapse back into the infinite light, or into its own darkness. So you need to have something to hold it together, and this is this residue. The other thing to say about this empty void is that this is a sort of dispute within Kabbalists, but the Hasidic approach, and we're learning here Kabbalah through Hasidic eyes, and maybe later on we can explain why. But for the time being, because I'm a Hasid. And the Hasidic view is that the tzimtzum, the opening of this empty space, is not to be understood literally. What does it mean? It means that it's only from a certain point of view has this tzimtzum even happened. But from another point of view, it has never happened. So the explanation is that if you live within this void, it's absolutely real for you. But don't take it literally. If you were to come out of this void, if you were to look at the world from God's point of view, so to speak, which is virtually impossible, but still and it is said that Moses was able to do this. God gave him, at least for a moment, this point of view. Then you would see that it is still an infinite light, just like it was before. So there are two truths here, and they're equally true. There is one truth, which is duality, the black darkness and the surrounding light behind it, and this is creation, or at least the stage upon which creation will be created. And then the light beyond it, and it's two things, and this is the bet of Bereshit. There's creator and creation, and there's light and darkness, and so on, with the darkness having a residue of light. And there's another perspective from which God has never changed. There's an important verse in the prophet Malachi. He says, I, God, have not changed. Ani havaya lo shaniti. I have never changed. Before the tzimtzum, after the tzimtzum, for me, it's the same in many ways, because it's all me. Hiding from myself, obviously it's a game. And I'm still here all the time. It's all divinity. But it doesn't mean that tzimtzum is an illusion, like some mystics say. It's not an illusion, but it depends on a perspective. So I said before that Moses was given this chance to look at the world from God's point of view. So the phrase is, there's a verse that says about Moses, about his particular kind of prophecy. He had a higher degree of prophecy than all the other prophets, including his brother and sister, and all the prophets to come. And it is said that his prophecy was through a completely transparent glass, and all the other prophecies see their prophecy through a semi-transparent glass. And so the verse describing his prophecy says, Utmunat Hashem Yabit. He saw God's image. Now we all know that one of the main tenets of Judaism and one of the 10 Commandments is that God cannot be made in any image, and he does not have any image. So what does it mean that he saw the image of God? And this is another verse says he saw the picture, the image of God. So one traditional explanation is that he saw in some external light, an emanation, and he saw the backside of God. This is how it's described. Rashi, the greatest commentator, that's what he says. But the Hasidim, coming from Kabbalah, gave another interpretation. He saw the picture that God sees. Tmunat Hashem Yabit, seeing God's picture, is seeing the world from God's point of view, from where you can see that the world is all divinity. It exists, but it's absolutely part of divinity. It's just as divine as divinity itself. So you have the truth of monism, infinite light, and the truth of dualism, and they coexist in this way. So if we were to have a picture of this, we should have one picture of just light and the other picture of this light surrounding the darkness, and they would equally be true, and only experiencing both can. And in fact, this is referred to when Hasidim say, God is all and all is God. In Yiddish, it's Alt ist Gott and Gott ist Alt. All is God and God is all. They're saying two different things. Saying that God is all is saying there's really only God, and that is all that exists. This is just an infinite light. God is all. But if you say all is God, you start with the all. You start with the experience of everything, of reality. And you say all this, you see all this, this is really God. So it's two different points of view. There is, God is really everything, this is what Moses saw, and there's, everything is deeply, it's divinity. Okay, and then there was another important stage to all this, and this is just setting the stage. The next step is that God took, so to speak, a line of light or a thread of light. Sometimes it's called a line of light, sometimes a thread of light, and he descended this light into creation. So that's right. We have this. We have an infinite light, and then there's this empty space that is created, so to speak. Again, it's not literally. And then, and again, this is the light, the surrounding light it's called, the light that surrounds all worlds. He takes one line or thread of light and he lets this line enter the world gradually. And this is the let there be light that we know from Genesis. And the surrounding light is called Or Mekif, surrounding light. It's Or Sovev, you're right, yeah, you're right. Or Mekif is a paraphrase of this, it's called Or Sovev, that's right. The English, it's maybe the same expression. The surrounding light, or the light that surrounds all worlds. And this line that goes in is called Or Memale, the light that fills all worlds. The light that fills all worlds. This is the light that surrounds the world, and the light that fills in, is poured into the worlds. Now, it doesn't just go in, it goes in and then it creates a world within the empty space. And this is the highest world. And it has more light than the next worlds. So Or Memale, the light that fills the world, depends on how big your vessel is. If you're in a higher state, you have a bigger circle, so to speak, you're part of a bigger world. The light goes down again, creates another circle. And then it goes more down, creates another circle. And so on and so forth. An infinite amount of circles. And we live in the smallest and lowest of circles. And this is the universe. The physical universe is the lowest of worlds. It's called the physical world of action, Olam Asiya Gashmi. And mentally or spiritually developing or evolving means acquiring or somehow connecting to a higher circle. We need to go up via a line. It means not just being in the world, but also climbing and advancing and learning. And after we grow from one, let's make a simple diagram. We live in a circle. We're content to be in our circle of being. But once we realize there's something beyond it, we need to find this line of light. And if we find it and we climb it, a bit like Jacob's ladder, or like a prophecy, or like something that descends from above, it's like a rope that is sent to save us when we're drowning. So, and we climb this line of light, we can reach a higher circle. And then we realize that the circle we lived in before was just a metaphor or a parable, mashal, an echo of a higher state of being. And this can go on and on. And this is really the secret of the structure of the week that is based on a Shabbat, a Sabbath, and then 6 days, and then another Sabbath. And the idea is that we can experience this as circular, another week, another week, another week, or we can experience it as something that spirals up. And spiraling up means that during the 6 days we need to work and learn and advance. And if we do something substantial during this week, then in the next Shabbat, in the next day of rest, we will have connected to a higher circle, so to speak. And the first circle and the second circle, they're a state of rest. We're just where we are. We're not trying to change anything. We're not trying to change ourselves. We're accepting ourselves. We just are. But we want to use the 6 days between each Shabbat to advance to a higher circle, so to speak. Of course, this is not just during the week. We can do this during one day. We can do this during all kinds of... A lifetime can be just moving from one circle to another, and so on. But this is the structure of the 6 days in the Shabbat symbolize this. And in fact, the Shabbat is described twice. It's commanded twice. The 10 Commandments are repeated twice in the Torah, once in the book of Exodus and the second time in the book of Deuteronomy. And they're given two completely different explanations, and because they refer to two circles, so to speak, that even within a Shabbat you should aspire to connect to both. So one of them says that you should observe, the Jewish people should observe the Shabbat because they were slaves in Egypt and now they're not slaves, so they have a day of rest. And it's a reason to be happy and rest. And this has to do with the lower level of the circle. But then the other explanation is that Shabbat reminds you of Genesis, reminds you of when the world was just created and it was just coming off the hands of God. And this is totally a different image of Shabbat. It means that you're not just resting, you're looking at the world and you're seeing this world is an echo of a higher world. And this is another description of Shabbat, that it's a reminder of the higher world. Me'ein olam haba. A reminder of the next world in the chain. So God creates a bigger circle and then a smaller and smaller circles, and we are supposed to evolve or develop from the smaller circles to the higher circles. And interestingly, the higher a circle is, the more internal it is. We see this world, it spreads all around us, and we see the exterior of everything. Going deeper, we imagine going deeper, like opening a box and going deeper, but here going deeper is going outside, and the deeper reality surrounds us. So it's both inside and outside. It's inside in the terms of you need to look inside in order to find it. You need to look deeper. But it's outside in the sense that it's more like the surrounding light. It's outside of you. So a very nice, simple metaphor would be that you find this magical babushka or matrushka doll, the Russian dolls that you open up and you find another one, but it's magical. If you open it up, the next doll inside is bigger than the one you had in your hands. And each time you open it up, you find a bigger babushka doll, and then you open it up, you find an even bigger one. So you can't animate it, but you can see the beauty of this image and feel what it symbolizes. And it symbolizes this, that this circle is inside the smaller circle. Okay, so this is just repeating and a little bit elaborating what we said yesterday. And now I was debating about what we should learn in the second. It's only a 4-lecture class or course, so there's very little we can put in. But I thought I was debating whether to go into the Sefirot, the system of the Sefirot, but I think we'll start that tomorrow. And today we'll develop this a little bit further on. And hopefully each class should give us at least 2 or 3 concepts that are interrelated and that we can do something with it. It's not just theoretical. So yesterday we talked about the 3 stages of infinite light, contraction or diminishment, which is opening up a space for someone else. Initially I'm full of myself in a way, and then I need to open up a space to put myself in the side and give room to something else. And then very gradually and slowly I have to to reach towards this other reality and person and connect to this line of light.
Can I just ask for my own reference? So are these the 5 trees system, or the trees of life?
The tree of life is
connected to this?
Yeah, so when we go into the details, then these circles become something called their worlds. But within each world, especially the highest world, there's a more complex system of Sefirot, which is not linear. It's based on 3 lines, and then they have a zigzag movement and all kinds of movements. And this is on the poster, and tomorrow we'll start exploring that. But for now, we'll start with something more basic, which would help us also understand better than the Sefirot, which is the concept that we're talking about many, many worlds here, but initially there were two worlds. And one of them is called the world of tohu. Let's just take this away because we're starting something new. So one world is called the world of tohu, which means, simply put, chaos or disorder. When God created the world, and it says that the world was tohu vavohu, two words, and this is one of them, and this is the chaos, the primordial chaos. The second word, the second concept is called tikkun, which means rectification. Tohu and tikkun. What do they mean? So the idea is this. The idea is that it doesn't start from Kabbalah. Like many concepts in Kabbalah, they try to explain cryptic sayings by the sages. By the sages are the generations of wise Jews who established the main writings of the oral Torah. The Mishnah and the Talmud and the Midrashim, the homiletic interpretations. And many of what they say has to do with Jewish law, practical law, and then many of it has to do with stories and thoughts, and some of it is very cryptic. And Kabbalah wants to take those cryptic sentences and open them up. And one of them was that before God created this world, He created many other worlds, but He didn't like them, so He destroyed them again. He made them and He destroyed them both. And finally, He created this world, and He says, "This one I like." Okay. And so Kabbalah calls this world, they sum it up into one world, and they call it the world of chaos, or the world of tohu. But chaos is a bit of a misleading word. It's not exactly what the word means. The word tohu actually comes from the word to wonder, to speculate. It has to do with a lot of thoughts, a lot of different thoughts. When you have a lot of different thoughts, it becomes chaotic. This is the connection. When you're just wondering and exploring and you're not going anywhere, there's something chaotic about it. The other word, bohu, means to blankly stare at something. Behiyah. Tehiyah or behiyah. So there are two forms of chaos. Tohu means having a lot of thoughts together, you don't know what to do with them. And bohu has to do with having no thought at all. Just staring blankly, it's void. And it's two forms of chaos, and this is one form of them. The other one is not considered, it's not a world, it doesn't have anything high to it, it's something else. But tohu is a very deep concept. So it goes like this. First he created a world, which was actually made up of many worlds. And this world immediately, or almost immediately, shattered to pieces. So before we said there's an infinite light, and then a contraction, tzimtzum, diminishment, there's a space, but this space is finite. Now imagine if God were to pour all of His lights immediately, not taking a thread of light, but He would just pour all of His infinite lights into this finite world. It would immediately explode like a light bulb. You have to pull in all your energy into the light bulb, and it explodes. And that's exactly what He did. So you could say this isn't a mistake, it's an accident, but God doesn't make accidents, so there must have been some reason. We have to try and figure out what the reason is. But first it simply said that there was a version of the world that had very high and great lights to it, but the vessels were still undeveloped. The vessels were still narrow and would easily break, fragile. And there was a terrible disparity between the intensity of the lights and the maturity of the vessels. So the definition of the world of tohu, right, the definition of tohu is great lights small vessels. Great lights, orot merubim, but small vessels, kelim mu'atim. This could mean few vessels, but more importantly, it means that the vessels were not fully developed. They were immature. They were too stiff. They weren't flexible enough in order to expand. And there's a reason he does this. He knows it's going to break, but he does it anyway. And then he creates another world, and this is the world of, and what happens before? All the fragments of the vessels, so to speak, fall down into this void, and they're all full of sparks from these great tohu lights. The sparks are buried or embedded in the shards, in the remains of the vessels, and it's a bit like diamonds hidden in a mine. There's a mine, it's very dark, it's very black, but it's full of diamonds, they're buried there. So this already gives us a hint of why he did this in the first place. And then he starts the second world, which is the world of tikkun. And the world of tikkun is the opposite of the world of chaos. It has, here the accent, the stress is put on the vessels. Here it matures, it grows, the vessels become more flexible, more mature. They also know the secret of inter-inclusion. They know different vessels can learn how to contain parts of other vessels. They learn to communicate and create dialogue and create a more mature system. It's taking different points of view and combining them, and this is all called tikkun. But the lights are not so great. Less lights, because we don't want the vessels to break. So there's only fewer lights, and it's a sustainable world. It's sustainability. It sustains itself. It doesn't break. It can last longer, and it constantly grows also. So this is the definition of tikkun. The opposite, great vessels. But smaller, fewer lights. And this is this world. But this dynamic repeats itself within this world. And we can see it everywhere. An artist wants to start a piece of art, and it starts with a flash of inspiration, and then he makes sketches. And the sketches are no good. You can't put them you can't make an art show and you don't put it in the museum unless it's modern art, and then you can do anything. But traditionally, the sketches are just the initial, also the sketches for a story or an idea or a vision. It flashes very instantly in your head, and you feel a tremendous feeling of innovation, but it's still chaotic, it's still tohu. You don't have the vessels to contain your own light. And then it breaks, it disappears like a dream. You wake up from a dream, it feels very meaningful, but then it suddenly escapes. And everything has an initial stage of a tohu, a chaotic step. That the lights come in, but you're not prepared for them because they haven't, it's the first time they're coming and you're not ready. And you don't have the concept, you can't fully explain it. And then you need to push the lights away and you need to concentrate on vessels. And this is something very rational, very sober. It doesn't have a lot of light. If the lights were to come back, they would interfere with this process. You need to create vessels to think and develop and work and design and draw and write and whatever it is you need to do and operate people. And you need to be fully here in order to do it. In order to somehow recapture the original lights. And of course, there's a reason why these lights come about. They come in order to push you into the direction of reclaiming them or recapturing them or reintegrating them into your life and your psyche. And now this is repeated again in many, also in the Torah. In the stories of the Torah, you see this repeated again and again. At first, God creates Adam and Eve, and He wants everything to be there perfect. But then the snake comes in and something breaks and they sin, and humanity deteriorates, and then at some point there needs to be a big flood, a deluge. And you can say that the entire 10 generations, Noah was the 10th descendant of Adam, the 10th or the 9th descendant, it was the 10th generation. So the first 10 generations in many ways are a chaotic period. And then it's all put aside, and another humanity started with Noah and his wife and 3 sons. And in a way, it's another stage, it's another step that it doesn't really fully work well because they build the Tower of Babel. And then again, no one is destroyed, but the language is taken away, the tower is destroyed. And there's another version that starts, and this is supposed to be the rectified one from Abraham onwards. And the idea is that everything starts, and then again it repeats. Abraham has 2 sons. The first son, he loves him very much. Abraham loves Ishmael very much. He doesn't want to push him, to send him away from his home. But God tells him through his wife that he needs to do it. Because this son has a lot of chaotic lights to him, but he's not the rectified. The second one is the rectified. And again, later on, Yitzchak gives birth to Isaac and Esau and Isaac. Isaac gives birth to Esau and Jacob, Esav and Yaakov. And the first twin is the first to come out, and he's very powerful, he's a hunter, he makes food, his father loves him very much, because he sees all the great lights in him. So on the surface you see that there is always a bad son and a good son, but Kabbalah tells you the bad son is spiritually higher than the first one, he has more lights of chaos. He belongs to the world. He's a soul of chaos. He's a soul of tohu. And the reason Ishmael is pushed away and then Esau is pushed away is not because they're bad. It's because they have more lights than vessels, or their vessels are immature in order to contain their light. And this is why their fathers love them more than they love the rectified son. The mothers have a stronger sense of rectification than the fathers. The fathers have a tendency more towards tohu. They like all these lights, but the mothers are more grounded. And they can recognize who the rectified son is. And if they're also we assume they're also as wise as the fathers, they can probably tell him, you're right, spiritually, Ishmael or Esav are high, which there's a difference between the two. But Ishmael was not the son of Abraham's wife, and Esau was the son of Isaac's wife. So there's some difference, but still they can say, he has a great soul, but he's not the carrier of our mission. He's not the one to continue the mission. And then it's even more subtle. Jacob has 12 sons. One of them, almost the youngest one, he's the rectified one. And the other ones, the 10 ones, they're not pushed away. But they're also mistaken. They have something chaotic about them. It's more rectified because then they're not pushed away. And it repeats in many, many places. And we can all see this in each and every life. When we're teenagers, when we're in the stage of adolescence, we have a lot of lights, new ideas coming in, we realize all kinds of new things, and we take them and we pull them but we're immature. And we're immature because we haven't lived long enough, and also we may live long enough, but we're not living in a way that takes life seriously. And taking life seriously means building vessels of rectification. And then, so for some people, adolescence passes on, and then you become more mature, and then you build vessels of tikkun, vessels of rectification, and it goes together. The lights diminish. The more you stress on, so this a very simple example is like Woodstock in the 60s. People had this immense lights, and these lights come from the end of days, so to speak. They wanted world peace, they wanted love for everyone, they wanted to replace the bullets with flowers, they would put flowers in the guns, and they dreamt, and they were incredible lights. But then nothing substantial came out of it in terms of world politics, and some of them, and also in terms of their own lives. And many of them left it and became bourgeois and became settled. They settled down, and the lights they had were lost or diminished. So this is an adolescent or a young, an undeveloped stage of existence would have chaotic lights, but not so much vessels. But then, when you choose life and you choose the vessels, you seem to lose some of the lights. But then, why do we need this first stage? Why do we need this world of chaos to begin with? Why have all these lights if we can't have them in the end? If at the very end they're lost because they break our vessels. By the way, speaking of Woodstock, or the generation of all these incredible lights, then one of the greatest, most iconic, we can say, images of the world of chaos is of someone playing the guitar more and more and more intensely, and finally having to break the guitar because it's the greatest crescendo we can have. And this is an image of chaos breaking itself. But again, why have this to begin with? Why have this urge? Why have this desire? Why have this vision, this inclination, this sense that there are chaotic lights and they're deep and true and authentic and meaningful, and God wanted it. He created this world, and this world is full of memories of tohu, of chaos. These are the sparks everywhere. And if you're sensitive, you remember them. Then you remember there's something greater to life than this. And you can even say that the modern man digging up the world and finding dinosaur bones, suddenly realizing there were this incredible, magnificent beasts that once roamed here before me, and where are they now? And children are captivated by this, and many adults are also, and because this image of suddenly, when you go to a museum of natural history, and suddenly I can't believe there was a being this size and he roamed the earth, and why is this so fascinating to us? Why is this so why does this bring up so deep feelings that are so deep? Because it's like an echo of this idea there was a world of chaos before this world. Great things were here, and immense things like mythological stories about gods and angels and monsters, and all these stories are ways of remembering that there were these lights of tohu. But why have this if choosing life and going for tikkun and creating vessels means that you have fewer lights, because then they will break again. So Kabbalah and Chassidut come and explain that there's a third stage, and this is the stage we should think this is what we should aspire to. And this is a combination of the two. These are the chaotic lights that are reminding ourselves that we're in a room of tikkun and studying that's irrational in words and ideas, but there's immense light going on outside. So the combination is called lights of tohu in vessels of tikkun. Lights of chaos in vessels of rectification. why should it be either or? It can be both. So the combination is lights of chaos in vessels of tikkun. And in Hebrew, this would be orot de tohu bekelim de tikkun. Orot de tohu bekelim de tikkun. Wow, it works. Orot de tohu bekelim de tikkun is when you grow up and you realize that your childish or adolescent dreams were immature, preliminary, naive, a lot of good intentions, a lot of good ideas, but not formulated, not developed. They don't really fit this world as it is. They dream of a better world, but there's no line connecting this world to the world you dreamed of. And then at first stage you say, okay, so let's choose this world. Let's stop dreaming of perfect worlds. Let's stop dreaming of incredible revolutionary art or revolutions in general. And let's be more modest and let's learn the world for what it is. And then the lights dim. But if you know how to do this right, then you say, hang on, those lights, I remember feeling them. They were they felt so powerful, so real. It wasn't just naivety. It wasn't just illusion. There was something to them. Now let's go back to them when I'm mature. Let's go back to those lights, but from an adult person's point of view. When I played the guitar, I felt something very powerful. I don't have to break the guitar in the end. That's just the vessels of chaos breaking because they're so childish, they're so simple. Going all the way and then breaking the guitar. Yeah, but maybe I can take that inspiration, put it into more vessels, more structure, and something that doesn't constantly break everything, but that builds something. It builds relationships, it builds households, it builds communities, it builds the world. It stays somewhere, it doesn't just fly off everywhere. And then you have an incredible combination. You can say about the modern world. The modern world felt it was too constricted by tradition, by going through the motion of rituals that were accepted from previously. And no, it's all rectification, no light. No light, the light is so dim. But suddenly you have revolutionary art, you have new scientific ideas, and you have new visions and new cultures that are opening up to you from every direction. And then suddenly you throw everything away and you go for the light. This is going from tikkun in a way back or to another kind of chaos because you're throwing everything away. But why should it contradict? Maybe you can have lights of chaos in vessels of tikkun. You need to find good vessels of tikkun. You need to build them. You need to find a good life wisdom, you can say.
I just missed it. The light of chaos in vessels of tikkun, that's the ideal?
Yeah, this is defined as the messianic ideal. Or this is almost the definition of what redemption is. The idea of redemption. All of the Tanakh, the Jewish Bible, evolves from chaos in the beginning of the world to a fully rectified world. And the fully rectified world is not a world in which everyone is just living out their lives, but they're living out their lives in constant contact with this infinite divinity, which has all these chaotic lights to them, because it's an infinite world acknowledging its infinite source and its infinite potential, and is constantly in constant memory or acknowledgement of divinity dwelling within this world. We said before that God wants to dwell in the lower realms. So God's light dwelling in the lower realms is the lights of chaos dwelling in the vessels of tikkun.
I want another question for clarification. When you talked about the two states of tohu and tikkun, they're dynamics. They're not like they're not worlds that existed before the creation. It's like a dynamic.
It's both. It's both. So the Kabbalah describes it as a stage that was and passed. There was a world of chaos, and then it broke, and then started the world of tikkun, which is this world or worlds.
Okay.
Yeah. But within this world, this dynamic repeats itself again and again. The initial dynamic stands for, it's a basic structure that then goes back in every individual growing up and in every new idea coming into the world, in every new stage of cultural development, and in every, and also when you learn, even when you learn something in Kabbalah, when you first learn it, it appears, if it's learned properly, it blows your mind initially. You learn something and you understand it very generally. You don't know, and then the more you study, and the more it goes into different examples and different. You can see different aspects of it and so on. And the process of learning itself goes through chaos and rectification, or tohu v'tikkun. You learn something new, and then you say, okay, you can push it away, but you can say, let's figure it out what it means, and then you. Now, one of the, and this may lead us to tomorrow, that one of the illustrations of this world of chaos is a very cryptic, like the cryptic sayings of the sages, there are also cryptic verses in the Tanakh. And one of the cryptic verses in the Tanakh talks about the descendants of Esav. Esav, the elder twin of Yaakov, the one who is the epitome of the soul of chaos, a soul of tohu. Again, his father loves him more than he loves the other son, and he's a hunter, and he's a man of the field. This is how it's described, a man of hunt and a man of the field. Ish tzayid ve'ish sadeh. Whereas Yaakov is a man of earnestness who sits in the tents. Ish tam yoshev ohalim. He studies in the tents. He's very introverted, not extroverted, but he's the tikkun character. By the way, the whole story of Yaakov is how he is first, he's a soul of rectification, but his whole life's journey is acquiring his twin brothers' lights of chaos. So the firstborn, the first one to come out is Esau. This is like the world of chaos. And he has hair all over them. Esau means completed, asui. He appears like he's a baby, but he has hair on his body. So he's like fully developed, so it seems. But he's a chaotic character. And then Yaakov follows. Yaakov means to follow. He held his brother's heel, and heel means, and heel and to follow is the same root in Hebrew. You follow someone's heels. And he held his heel, and he came out, and he didn't have hair, and he was younger and smaller and not as developed and not as extroverted again. And then Rebecca, the mother, sees, and the angel tells her that the younger one has to rule over the older one, and he's the successor. And so what does she do? She cheats her husband into giving the blessings to the elder son to give them to the younger son, not to the older son. And how does she do this? She does this by dressing up the younger son as the older brother. He puts on a fur on his hands to be as hairy as his brother. He's putting on a disguise. He's learning how to be his brother in a way, how to be a bit like his brother. And then he comes to his blind father, and the father says, your voice is the voice of Jacob, but your hands are the hands of Esau. And here the voice is it's the voice of learning and the voice of praying. It's the soul, and he has a soul of rectification. But now he's learning how to acquire, here the lights in the vessels are a bit reversed. He's putting it into, he's using the tools, the instruments of chaos. He knows how to integrate chaos into his own being. He takes the hairy arms of his, because the older brother is much more physical. He's a hunter, a man of the field. He knows how to do things. He doesn't sit in the tent all day. Chaos sometimes has to do with living life externally more fully. And he acquires this. And then the next step is Rebecca tells him, now you have to run away to my brothers in Haran, in a different land. And there's a land of bad people. They cheat one another. And in fact, Lavan is going to cheat him into marrying a woman he didn't want to marry. And going there and being with these rough people and knowing how to deal with people who lie and cheat is part of learning the laws of the world of chaos. And then, what is the story about him marrying the elder sister? So it's explained that just like he had an older brother, there were two sisters on the other side. There was the youngest one, Rachel, and the older one, Leah. Rachel was a soul of rectification like him. That's why he fell in love with her. Leah was a soul of chaos. She had a higher soul, a chaotic soul. She was meant to marry Esau. But she ended up marrying Jacob. And then he gets up in the morning, he says, I didn't ask for this wife. Why do I need this wife? She's a chaotic wife. She's like my brother. She's not for me. But she ends up giving him the most important of children. In many ways, the kings and priests all come out of Leah. And then finally, the final stage is when he meets the angel at night. And the angel is really the angel of Esau, and he fights the angel, and he conquers the angel, and then he acquires all the lights of chaos, or almost all of them. He has a new name, and according to Kabbalah, then he falls in love with Leah. Because suddenly he's on her level. She was on a higher level. She belonged to the world of chaos. He was just from the world of rectification. But then he has a new name, he contains her lights. And even then, he knows he still has some way to go. So when he meets his brother, and they hug and embrace, and they're not fighting anymore, he tells him, and Esau tells Jacob, come with me. We're not enemies anymore. I forgive you. Everything is okay. Come with me. Jacob tells him, no, you run along, and I'll proceed gradually behind you. I'll proceed slowly. Et nahalale iti. You run, but I'm going to advance more slowly, and I'll meet you at your place. That's what he says. I'm also going in the direction of the lights of chaos. I'm going to meet you at the same place. But while you run, I go step at a time, because I have children, and because I have livestock, and I need to take care of them, and I'm in the world of tikkun. I wanted to take your lights of chaos. I follow you. His name is to follow. And this is a beautiful image of what, so sometimes, so we have three stages here. There's the tohu and the tikkun, and then the combination. And sometimes it seems like you want to skip the middle stage. You want to say, who needs this tikkun? Who needs to marry and settle down and build a life and treat this world seriously? I can just have these lights of chaos immediately. But then this structure tells you, you can have them, and you're going to have them. You're going to have them in a way that's far superior to experience them fleetingly. You can have them by letting go of them for a while, and then entering fully the world of tikkun. And it doesn't mean you're going to become a bourgeois, and it doesn't mean you're going to become just another tired soul, because you remember the lights of tohu, don't forget them. And at some point, you'll be able to bring them back, but it's not going to break the guitar, or there was another rock and roll song called My, Hey, Hey, rock and roll is here to stay. My, Hey, Hey, it's better to burn out than to fade away. But it's not either or. You cannot burn out and you cannot fade away. Burning out is chaos. Fade away is tikkun without lights of chaos. But if you build a campfire, a world of tikkun, you can have all these great lights, but they don't burn you out. So I was going to say before that one of the greatest metaphors is when we talk about Esav and his descendants. The Torah describes that he had 7 kings, one after the other, coming from his seed, the descendants of Esav. And they all ruled and died. Ruled and died. Vayimloch vayamot. Ruled and died. Ruled 7 kings, one after the other. They have names. Some things are said of them. But each one it is said, Vayimloch vayamot, ruled and died. The numerical value of the 2 words, Vayimloch vayamot, is tohu. So that's a hint that they're called the kings of tohu, the kings of chaos. And what was their problem? Each one had an amazing vision of the world. Each one belonged to a sephirah that we're going to learn about tomorrow. Each one had his own amazing light. And he wanted to bring this light to the world. But he didn't have a feel for how this world can contain this light. So he just brought it smashing down. And then his kingdom broke. And he died. He ruled and he died. And he didn't interact with the other kings, and he didn't interact with his people, and he didn't know how to put the lights into vessels. So he poured down the lights, and his kingdom broke. 7 worlds of kingdoms, 7 worlds of chaos, or kingdoms of chaos. And then the 8th king, there's an 8th king after them. His name is Hadar, and he's different in 2 respects. It is said of him, and he ruled, but it is not said of him, and he died. It says Vayimloch, he ruled, but it never says he died. His kingdom lasted. Why? This is explained by the other way in which is different from the other 7. He had a wife. And he's the only one who has a wife, or at least whose wife, maybe there's many wives, there's also chaos. But he had one wife, and she was important enough to have her name written. She was called Mehei Tavel. It has this beautiful name, Mehei Tavel, which in Kabbalah has a lot of meanings. But here the point is that the fact that he married, and married here means he took his light and put it into a vessel, and through his wife he could understand his people, and through his people he could understand his kingdom. And he put the light into vessels, then his kingdom didn't break. And so the 7 kings are called the kings of chaos, and the 8th king is called the beginning of rectification. So to sum it all up, what we have here, we have this infinite light and then the contraction, and then the light goes into the world, but it goes in 2 stages. The first is it's all poured in and the world breaks. And it takes place in order that somewhere in the back of our minds and in the world there's a hidden memory that once upon a time amazing lights were present here, even if it was just for a while in its past. Just like dinosaurs and stories about monsters and gods of old. And it takes place for a reason, because we need to long for them again. But then another world is created, the world of tikkun and rectification. It takes a lot of time. It's the entire history of humankind. But the point of it is not that we live in a world that's stable but ungodly, or stable but sane. The point is not to be sane. The point is to be sanely insane. It's to have insane lights with insane vessels. So we need to build a lot of vessels, and it's a lot of work. And when you marry and you build a life, sometimes most of the day, most of the week has to do with building a world of rectification, just having this world manage and be everything in order. But the point of it is not that you're sane. The point is not to be a conservative. The point is not to be someone who goes to work and goes back. The point is to use this routine, use this sanity, utilize all of this civilization that we're building in order to be a vessel for incredible, crazy, creative, infinite lights that continuously recreate us and remind us of our infinite potential. And we should take this model as a model for life, in a way. This is what this whole thing tells us. This is what Chassidut does to Kabbalah. Chassidut takes the Kabbalistic concepts and tells us, now take them and connect them to your lives and see, and they structure a model for you that's a good model. And it's not a model that's very romantic in the sense that you can immediately have everything and everything you feel just by following your heart. But it's also not a conservative model. It's a combination of liberal and conservative, or romantic and enlightened, that is rational. But it gives you stages. You should follow your head before your heart, and you should use it to build vessels, but then your heart is to fill it up with these lights also. So this is my second chapter in Introduction to Kabbalah. And I'd love to hear your thoughts or questions, if you have any. I'm sure you have a lot, but...
I have some comments.
Comments? Great.
Just to share my understanding of what you heard. For me, when I hear the word vessel, I hear not something like a world or something, I hear body.
Mm-hmm.
So I hear is vessel, and so the way I perceive these great lights force the expansion of the vessel, and there is a way that they can break it, but there is a way that they can just expand it.
Mm-hmm.
And not forcing a great soul to confine itself to like tikkun way in order to slowly build, but rather to purify and empty from within so the vessel will expand.
Again?
To purify and empty from within one's own identity that actually prevent the vessel from flexibly expand. And then the vessel can actually expand by letting go of belief system or emotional tensions or any identity that we hold inside that stops this flow of expansion, rather than, and this is also what people perceive from the other hand doing in the tikkun, which allows more and more light to come in slowly, not because they have family or they have a job or it's just their outer appearance, but because this helps them to relax more and let go more slowly of themselves from the way of light coming in. So it's like in great lights there is the opposite movement of light expand the system, rather than it's like light expand the body rather than the body brings more light, as from the other end of the tikkun. That's the way I perceive it, at least. Because it doesn't make sense in my own experience to fake something as of a tikkun world if it's not one's own natural path. Like to go and find a job, just to go and slowly. It just, there is great light, and the body cannot contain them, so there is reduction of them, but not necessarily in a way of needing to do what everyone does, but in the sense of going on my own purification process that allow more space.
Yeah, well...
Because people can have a job and whatever, children and this and that, and no expansion at all.
Mm-hmm. That's getting lost in the vessels of tikkun without remembering that their purpose is to recontain the light. Mm-hmm. But what you just presented is very different from the way. The first thing that is the way you presented it, identity and sense of self, is something that stands in the way of vessels containing lights. And in Chassidut this would not be explained. There would be a different explanation. The explanation would be, or the understanding would be, that a sense of identity is, you can't live without it. It's not true that you can live without it. There's an illusion that you can get rid of it and it stops you. There is a false self-image that stops you. There is something like that. There is something like a false self-image, that when you hang on to it, you're distancing yourself from who you're meant to be and your full potential, and from any kind of growth. But it doesn't mean that any kind of attachment or any kind of identity is harmful. The opposite. It's part of building vessels, building mature vessels that work in this world. Is also having a sense of identity and place and connection and obligation. And why? Because then it becomes this very strong vessel for influence, for steady influence that really builds something, and not just sprinkles something on the world. And so there is a kind of false identity and false self or false image that one needs to. It's like idols that need to be shattered psychologically. But in order to erase myself in some way, and also vessels in the plural means that there are different kinds of vessels and different kinds of realities. And when I talk about entering the world of tikkun, it doesn't mean it's the same for everyone. Absolutely not. It's not the same for everyone, and one has to be very careful to listen to one's own calling and one's own talents and one's own particular individual potential for what to do with this world. But there is something that all people should have in common if we're to understand what the word of tikkun means, and that is that all these vessels are grounded seriously within the world of adults and the world of responsibility. And without this, then we could be telling ourselves, I'm doing my own personal vessels, but it's really, one should be honest with oneself in this regard, because one should consider the fact that he may be cheating himself a little bit, and he may be doing what's easy, but not what he's really capable of doing in this world. He's capable of doing much more by grounding himself more into the world, less into the world of lights and more into the world of vessels. But it's true that everything has to be authentic, everything has to be real, everything that doesn't have to do with this. Well, yeah, you can say that someone who only lives vessels and his lights are not there, he's not present, he's sort of absent from his own house. That this is kind of a negative version of tikkun, and it's a completely inauthentic life. And part of what lights of chaos and vessels of rectification means is that you're constantly present in what you're doing, you're connected to what you're doing, you know that it's the true realization of who you are, and so on. It's not some blindly following some routine that other people have defined for you. This is empty vessels, just empty vessels. That's not what I'm talking about at all, obviously.
Yeah, surely the base of what we share is self-honesty.
Is?
Self-honesty. So of course everything that they share is given that we speak about one should be honest with themselves.
Yeah.
And in any aspect. But just to say that they didn't mean identity as identity is something wrong or any identity. I meant of the personal identity that limits growth, which relates to...
But do you think that personal identity by definition limits growth?
I think that personal identity that rooted in fear, belief system and pain that are rooted in fears, or shames, or judgments.
But if there is a fear, but the fear is balanced by understanding or by something that is not only fear. Can I see that? And also I think there are types of fear. I think sometimes there's good fear. If you fear to go into the jungle, that's a good fear, It's a good fear. There are things to be afraid of. You're talking about a negative kind of fear. So I think, this can go on, but I see what you mean. Yeah, I see what you make a distinction between an identity that is healthy and one that is unhealthy, and this is a place to grow, that the dialogue can grow on from.
A healthy identity is a happy vessel, right?
Yeah. It's a vessel that feels that it's doing its job, that it's growing in the direction of fully containing the lights of your soul and your personality. If you feel that the lights are empty, then it means you forgot something meaningful about yourself. And
you're super in light, but you don't feel grounded so much.
Yeah. And again, Isaac didn't like his young son, who was too much of a rectified. What are you doing in the tent all day? Why are you studying all day? I want you to be a hunter like your brother. But from the two, which one do you choose? Do you choose the one who's already in the chaos, or you choose the one? Apparently, it would seem that there were two routes to go. You could choose Esau and then teach him to settle down. Or you could choose Jacob and teach him to acquire the lights of chaos. And the path that the Torah and the Kabbalah put before us is first you should be Jacob, then you should struggle with the lights of chaos until you contain them. And this is a better way to go. This is the message of the story, you can say. But I feel more like Esau. Yeah, but he doesn't end well. And you want to end better. If you end better, so you go back a little bit and you become Jacob. There's something, Esau sells his Bechorah, his eldership, or his right to inherit. He sells it because for something momentary. He wants to eat this stew, and he doesn't care about the future. And there's that's something chaotic. It's very powerful. It's amazing.
I also you gave like teenagers, like adolescents into parenthood, and I could just share something small that as I feel that I develop more and work on myself. Every year that I gain in my life, I'm so happy. Like every year I become happier. And sometimes I long for this freeness and this like everlasting light that I had in my teenage year in the early 20s. But I also feel like deep down I'm accessing them, but just in a bit more of like an adult, mature way.
Yeah.
So I think it's both a real dance and but yeah, so again, I think if it's done right with a lot of like with a lot of
consciousness,
then the bridging them is really beautiful.
Yeah. Yes.
I want to share another just thing that I have a twin sister,
Mm-hmm.
and she's very fully tikkun. She's very like at home and family and this and I as my mom said, I should have come first. And
She was the first to come? So it's the opposite of Esau.
My sister pushed me aside, and this is why my finger is like this. That's what my mom said, and then she came out first.
And it's the opposite of the heel.
Yeah. It doesn't have to be good.
Yeah.
And I'm very much feel related to tohu. But I want to say also that tohu for me doesn't mean necessarily that Esav needs to settle down, but that he need to transform his negativity. And that's something else, and to reveal light. And
It's absolutely part of rectification. That's absolutely part of it. Yeah, it's absolutely a stage. And
so chaos is a lot of light that can come out through destruction, but if it's held right, it can come as
exactly.
most beauty.
Yeah. Maybe if your sister becomes a little bit more chaotic, then you can become.
I help her.
Huh?
I help her, so.
Yeah, so it should be mutual.
She also helps me. She
okay.
comes and I have a room there, so I can just sit there for a few months and come.
Would you mind explaining like rectification in a really simple way, like maybe not in a Kabbalistic way, like if you could say it in a few sentences?
I thought I did it several times here.
But no,
that it's
with these, like not using maybe this.
Yeah. Well, writing sheet music. Learning how to write sheet music. Right? The Tavim, all the composers would have amazing inspiration, but they needed to narrow it down to the symbols and the straight lines, and then they can develop it and transmit it, and it becomes something that, in a way, classical music generally is more tikkun, and then things like jazz or things that are more chaotic, and They're simpler, but they're more powerful emotionally. There's a very powerful musical tradition within Hasidut, and it appears to be very simple music. It doesn't have a lot of, it doesn't develop very much. It develops only to a certain point, then repeats itself. It's far less sophisticated than Mozart or Bach, but it has more soul to it. And sometimes listening to classical music is a bit like going inside of a palace, very beautiful Baroque palace with all this, and it's very beautiful, but it somehow feels a little that something deeper is missing. And then there's something about jazz or music like that is very intuitive and flowing, that it feels more, it strikes a deeper chord, but it's also, you're flying in everywhere and you're sort of drifting. You're drifting aimlessly somehow. It feels like a jam session. It doesn't end, doesn't start. It's sort of. And then there's something about this particular Hasidic songs, or it's songs without words. It's just tunes. That feels like a combination. So. And it has a certain structure to it, but it's very simple. And the purpose of the structure is, it's not supposed to be this grand palace. It's supposed to be like a corridor, like sort of a ladder. It's something but it evokes very deep feelings. And it's maybe a very personal image, but because I use classical sheet music as an example, but that's too much rectification. Sometimes it doesn't have. It's too intellectual. It's too.
What is that?
Hasidic. Yesterday I spoke about the 4 stages, and the final stage of Kabbalah was the Baal Shem Tov, and that's Hasidut or Hasidism. It's the 18th century Eastern European movement of Jewish revival that I belong to, and there's several branches.
And how do you spell that H?
Sometimes it's written just with an H, Hassid. It could be Hasidut or Hasidism. And sometimes with a CH, and sometimes with 2 S, sometimes with 1 S. It's 4, it's 4, at least 4 variations you have. And because it's either Hasidism or Hasidut, so you have maybe 8, I don't know how much we have now. Double S, not double S, H, CH. But I think Google by now has enough AI to lead you from one.
Yeah, Google knows you've been here, so.
When you come out, Google's going to offer you some Hasidic nigunim, some Hasidic tunes. The moment you come out, it's going to. So, that's it for today, and tomorrow we go fully into the beautiful and complex, not that complex, but it's more than meets the eye complex model of the 10 Sefirot. So within the world of rectification, you have a model of different divine emanations, 10 divine emanations, structured in a particular way according to a particular dynamic, and that provide a sort of internal map of the world, an internal map of the soul, and an internal map of rectified dynamics of rectification, of how to take the light and put them into vessels.